Hello, everybody. I am going to lecture on Chapter 2, hopefully clarify some things for you, point out things you'll want to pay attention to, maybe some comparisons that you will want to think about for the future, um, and just to add in some details to some of the images. So we are looking at Mesopotamia and just a little bit of Persia at the end, and we are in the Bronze Age. And I should say that the Bronze Age is called the Bronze Age, obviously, because the peoples of this time will come up with ways to manipulate bronze and mix it with tin and do things with that. And this is really what distinguishes the time periods, that's these technological advances. So we have prehistory because there's no writing yet, but it's also the Stone Age, right? Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, the Stone Age, because these cultures are not using bronze yet, right? So we ended the chapter with the Stonehenge. So that is because those cultures are still using stone. So they belong in prehistory, but really time-wise, Stonehenge is pretty late. It's almost contemporary with the pyramids. So it's just a distinction by what they're using or how advanced they are in technology at this point. So we do have these cultures in Mesopotamia that have advanced in their technology and they are using bronze. We won't look at a lot of bronze things, but it is the Bronze Age. All right, so Mesopotamia, Meso, you heard that Mesolithic meaning the middle. So Mesopotamia is the land between two rivers, and in this case it's the Euphrates and the Tigris. And this is also considered like a very fertile land, just like Egypt will be in the Nile Valley. Archaeologists call this the Near East, even though we consider it the Middle East now because it is closest to Europe. It's a logical place for people to settle, right? We call it the Sumer is the area in Mesopotamia, and then we're going to have a whole bunch of little city-states like will be, or Uruk. We'll look at those individually. It's logical because things grow easily and you have many sources of water, both to get on and sail away and trade things or to exist on. We're going to see new technologies, the first city that we'll talk about, the first writing, and astrology. All right, and then these cities down here, Jericho and Uruk, are just the cities that we'll look at in Sumer in Mesopotamia. All right, so just a note about civilization. We use this term, or art historians and anthropologists use this term to say cities or a state of living in one place together with a large group of people. Literally, cives in Latin is cities. So we don't mean civilized the way we would use it today. Like we don't say, these people are uncivilized because they don't use bronze. These people are civilized because they live in cities, right? It's a more textbook meaning than you would use, for something else. So we're going to see state rule. There's going to be a hierarchy of government, of course, with kings who will be believed to be ordained by gods or like priests on earth, like the messenger for the gods, and it is a pantheistic society. So they believe in many gods. There'll be laws and taxes. At this point, there'll be no separation between church and state. The king is the ruler of the state, and the king speaks for God, so he might as well be considered a god, and we'll certainly see rulers who will use this or feel this way. So if all these people are going to live together, you do need these things. You need a hierarchy. You need a rule of law, right? Some people have to be in charge, whether it's one man or some kind of government. There needs to be a division of labor. Not everybody has to go out and hunt and gather any longer. You are in the same city together. So if you're good at something, that will be your trade, or you maybe you won't be lucky to be that. It is a slave society. So there's that as well. There is centralized worship. There will be temples that you can go to. And of course, it's pantheistic. So, there'll be temples for different gods, votives, offerings, opportunities for art, I like to call this. So Sumer has independently governed city-states. They trade between each other and they may come together for religious ceremonies, but they are governed independently. And so if you're going to trade between cities, you need some kind of system to come up with for debts or honesty, and I'll explain that in a second, or for inventory. So if you're going to trade with somebody in another town and you are running your own business in your town, I'm calling them towns, city-states, you may send 2 slaves with 5 barrels of beer, which was quite a commodity in this time, to get your, 25 bales of hay or whatever you're getting from them. So you send your slaves with the stuff and they come back and you hope that you got the right amount of stuff, right? Like maybe a barrel of beer goes missing. So Sumerians come up with this idea that they'll have tokens that indicate the worth of something. And they'll take a piece of clay and what we would consider to be a stamp. It's a cylinder, and we'll look at that. And you roll it on the clay, and that's your stamp, like your personal stamp. And you enclose these tokens inside the stamp, like in a ball. And then your people will take this to whoever for the payment. Not necessarily barter, but this would be if you were it's like a debt that you would have. So in order to keep track of goods, this is the system that they come up with. And let me show you these cylinders. So this would be the cylinder, which would be rolled on the wet clay, and that's what it would look like. And so a lot of these are very well preserved. You can still use them to make these things. So this would be rolled up on these ducats or stones or whatever the system was for the city-states, to be used more like money, representing whatever it is you're bartering. But this didn't last long because this is very time consuming to make these things and keep track of all these, and you have to have a lot of clay and all that. So what the Sumerians come up with is another way to mark clay, more like bookkeeping, numerical systems, or writing. And this is called cuneiform, which is considered to be the very first writing. And that's an important thing in history, of course, because now we have history, not prehistory. History is the written record of events in the past. And eventually, cuneiform evolves into real writing. At first, let me show you these. These two, like some of the oldest images we have of cuneiform, are really just like receipts. Writing comes out of necessity to keep track of things. All right, so writing is the boundary between prehistory and history, right? And now eventually writing will evolve. So here we have, this is the original pictograph, and then this is cuneiform, right? So you can see it's very, like, this is just twisted. This is simplified. So pictograph means it represents the thing. So bird, fish, whatnot, wheat. Cuneiform starts to be read more as symbols, which is on the way to what we might call an alphabet. Eventually this gets so simplified that it would become writing. All right, so cuneiform is what starts this all. So using a stylus, which is just a tool to embed into the clay, it's just a quick way of communicating, usually just inventory at this point. So what does this mean for history? It means that we can understand what they're doing. We don't have to do the guesswork like in prehistoric art. Uh, whether it's mythology or belief, we understand how they lived and what they believed through writing. That is what writing we do have. All right, we're going to look at the Sumerian city of Uruk. Again, you do not have to know dates just because I list them here. You should know that we're talking about ancient Mesopotamia or Sumer at this point. Uh, in Uruk, we consider Uruk to be the first city. It has irrigation, so they're learning to manipulate the water, not just the land for plants. So obviously, you develop a great irrigation system, and then your agricultural community will thrive. Big religious centers. You need a place for people to go. In some cases, people aren't allowed to go to these, only special people can. Pictograms are transitioning to cuneiform. They speak an Elamite and Sumerian language. And again, it's a loose confederation of city-states. I think there's only two things from this Uruk that we look at. One is the White Temple, and this is in Uruk, or what we call Waka, because we have the Waka vase, and that it's the same place. And because there aren't a lot of stones like there are all over Europe, when we looked at the Meso and megalithic or mono and megalithic communities in Europe or in England, these buildings and giant structures are made of mud and brick, which is not very stable over, thousands of years. So it's a miracle that they're even standing still. And this is what a restored drawing of this would look like. So this is a giant, it's called the White Temple because it has gypsum walls, which is white. It's just a nickname. It has nothing to do with the outside of it or what was happening in it. And this is another reconstruction drawing. So you can see that you have these giant slanted walls. And this is a stairway up, which does not lead to the front entrance. There's no frontal entrance on these. You go up and you're on the platform. So you're meant to walk around it. Right. This was 43 feet high, which to us might not seem that tall, but it's very tall on a flat, deserty kind of land. The corners of the temple are oriented to the compass. It's most likely dedicated to the god Anu, which is the sky god. And again, the Sumerians are pantheistic, meaning they believe in many gods, all associated with things of nature. Um, one god will be charged as sky, moon, night, that kind of thing, sun. And Sumerians, like many religions, believe that the gods are above and the masses, we, people, are below. The temples themselves are not for many people to go to, like a church. It's really for select officials and priests to go to. You may go to the temple and make some kind of dedication or bring a votive, but you are not allowed to go up there and say your prayers or whatever. It has chambers inside the temple and a cella, which is the divinity's room, housed with an altar inside of it. And these temples are considered to be waiting rooms for deities to descend from heaven and to appear to priests. Right? So this is why people aren't just allowed to go up there. This is, the waiting room, and inside this would be the altar. This is the cella. All right, there's other things inside of here, chambers. You can see here, you can go in the door. Right, so we see again height being used as some kind of symbol. It's like you're getting higher to the gods. but also you're imposing on the land. And we'll look at this in the future as more and more cultures continue to do this with religious or governmental structures. Also from Uruk is the Walker vase. Again, all of these titles are just either where they're from or something archaeologists titled them. It's not what they would have been called in their own time. Um, and in some cases, we don't know. We have writing, but not everything is written down. As I said, writing develops for receipts and taxes and things like that. So we don't have a lot of writing. Oops, I should go back to this. When I wrote this, there is a lot of writing later on, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, um, which has very similar qualities to other things you might think of. It has a god with two of everything on a boat. He goes underwater to talk to a serpent. And it's really about the meaning of life. And this poem you can still read. In some cases, college um, courses assign the Epic of Gilgamesh, which comes out of um, Sumer. All right, back to our worker vase. This is a vase that's almost it's like 3 1/4. Oh, there it is, 3 feet and a quarter inch high. Um, it's a funerary vase. Uh, it might have meant to be meant to hold ashes or just to be put outside of uh, where a person had died. It is a narrative, so there's a story being told of a procession, which just means people lining up, going almost like we would call a parade a procession, but you might not call a funerary procession is when you're carrying goods in a funeral. Um, uh, of ritual libations. So we're going to see these people here on this part carrying libations, which are offerings or oils or liquids um, to offer to the gods. We see gods and mortals intermingling on this vase. So the bottom is all plants down here. Then the second row, which we're going to call registers, I have a slide on that for you. These are animals. And then above them, as if this is like the earth, we have the attendants carrying food and libations, like offerings. And then the top is a whole bunch. You can see these little people. It is little scenes of somebody being given animals as offerings, and somebody's being helped getting dressed as if they're being prepared for the afterlife. So it's most likely the person whose funeral it will be. So this is a drawing of it, so I might be able to see clearly the plants, the animals, the attendants. Please notice that the attendants have their legs, so we can see two of them. They are in profile, but if you can kind of see their eyes, so you can see this guy's eye, their eyes are looking straight at us. So they're in profile, but their eyes are not in profile, or the one eye is not in profile. And then on top we have, this bigger guy here, somebody is, he's helped being dressed, and then this man seems to be also larger, and they're bringing him offerings. All right, so we have two bigger people, and then we have some very small people. All right, so we have registers are when bands are used to usually create some kind of narrative, and in each band there's something separate going on. Sometimes the bands are just decorative, like these plants. Right? We can call this a relief carving. We looked at that in the last chapter. So registers, relief carving, and the whole thing is in the round. Right, so you have a relief carving on a work that is a form in the round. And then we have the different sizes, hierarchical scale. There we go. All right, and I believe we've had this before, but again, anything in the PowerPoint that is red, that is a term that you should know. All right, so the order of scale is the order of importance. The procession is toward afterlife. So kings would go on afterlife with the gods, and if you're lucky, you could go with the king, or you could go to the underworld forever. So one thought on this face, or other things like it, is does this sort of indicate that attendants go willingly? They seem to be going willingly on the vase, right? Do they, of course they're religious, they buy into the system. Do they believe that they should just go with the king and be his attendant in the afterlife rather than go to the underworld, which was not a great place? And again, many of these religions will have very similar things. You can probably think of other religions that have um, a similar system. All right, we have this also from Uruk. All right, so sorry, there are three things from Uruk. This is a female head, probably Inanna, who is the goddess of love and war. And it is a marble head, 8 inches high, so a good size, maybe a little bit smaller than life size. And marble, of course, is very expensive and has to be imported to Uruk. They don't have many stones or quarries, of course. This would have been inlaid with probably precious metals and like seashells. She would have had an elaborate headdress on, probably. Her body is missing because that was most likely made of plaster or wood or clay. Right? They can't afford the whole thing to be marble. And that body probably would have been dressed with jewels and things like that. So when we look at some of these things, even the beautiful white marble Greeks that we're going to look at, they would have been painted or decorated in some way that we no longer see. The paint goes away, but the marble stays forever, hopefully. She has very large eyes, but mostly she's naturalistic in her proportions. She might even be slightly expressive with her mouth sort of pursed. And these are, you can call these votive figures if you want to say statuettes of two worshippers, which is the title. I don't mind if you just call them votive figures from Sumer. Um, these are found all around. There's dozens and dozens of these in museums all over the place. These are not meant to be gods, but these are individuals. They range from about like, I don't know, less than a foot to like 3 feet tall. Um, they are shown carrying libations. Again, these oils or drink as offerings to the gods. The men are shown with beards and frayed skirts, and the women are showed with one shoulder shown, usually some kind of headdress. And proportion-wise, well, the men are pretty muscular, right? They don't look terribly out of proportion, except for, you can probably see, the very enlarged eyes. So these would have been votive. So they would have been either been buried by the temple or brought somewhere as a dedication. And here's just more examples of them. And you can tell there's younger people, older people. So all different ways of doing this, but all of them in the same pose. Students often say, "Oh, they're saying their prayers." Well, that's something you might be familiar with, but most likely they're just holding things. They're not. Maybe that's where it comes from, originates, but they are holding little offerings. But again, all of them. So we have this. We talked about this in chapter 1. It is a convention that the males be shown in the skirt, usually with the beard. I don't know what happened with this guy's beard now that I'm saying it. And then the women with one shoulder shown, and then the enlarged eyes and the pose. So these are conventions. That means the way things are done, like the twisted perspective of a bull. So Sumerian votive figures. There's lots of theories, of course, about what are they staring at? Are they staring at the afterlife? Is it the eternal stare that we're going to look at in Egypt? Possibly. In Ir, we have a bull-headed harp. We know that there was music in these ancient cultures. This is a very elaborate harp. It's called a lyre or a lyre in some chapters, but we can call it a harp, that's fine. There is a gold-headed bull uh, that is a head on the box of the harp, the music box, the sound box, and it has inlaid of these beautiful tiles with some crazy things happening. I'll show you these a little bigger. And then the beard of the bull is lapis lazuli, which we'll see in the future. This bluish purple is one of the most precious stones. So obviously this harp belonged to somebody or was somewhere of great stature. And these are what the tiles look like. We have animals bringing trays of animals. An odd thing here. A donkey with human hands over here plays the harp while a bear tunes it. And there is a gazelle at his feet playing another instrument. And then we have this man in twisted perspective, right? His torso faces us, his legs are sideways, and he holds some anthropomorphical, sorry, animals. So this is probably some kind of mythology, right? It has some meaning, like all these things probably have some meaning. I love this, that this guy has like a knife. So probably mythology. Sumer was a great cultural center, but around this time, 2332 BCE, it comes under the domination of the Akkadians and King Sargon, who was called Sargon the Great of Akkad, who rules with an iron fist. It's not the Iron Age yet. I guess he rules with a bronze fist. So the new concept of royal power, he has a new concept of royal power, and that is loyalty to a ruler rather than a city-state. So we see kings taking power, and we'll see art reflecting that. His grandson Naram-Sin considered himself to be akin to God on earth and considered his government to be his personal servants. Servants to the state are servants to him. He is the state. He is God on earth. All right, so this is possibly the head, or sculpture of the head of Sargon the Great. He conquers all of Sumer, and the whole area becomes, instead of all these separate city-states, one nation, which he rules. The Akkadians are known to be brutal military fighters and known for military rule. This here is a copper casting. So we're in the Bronze Age, so bronze, copper, tin all being used. And the lost wax method of casting, which you start with a cast, is very complicated. You start with a cast and then you leave a space after you cast it, and inside that space you can pour hot liquids, and the wax melts off. It's very advanced technically, and it's dangerous because you're dealing with very hot liquids. But these things are permanent. And of course, this isn't just used for sculpture, it is used for weaponry. So if you can manipulate metals, and we'll see this in the Iron Age, then you have quite an advantage over your enemies. So this particular sculpture, though, you can see it looks it's a likeness to somebody. Um, it's very naturalistic, but looks very specific in its pose, its um, proportions. Right? But this is damaged because in its own time, it was buried. Well, its eyes were gouged out, so that would have had some kind of glass or not glass, seashells or some kind of jewels inside of the eyes. They were gouged out, and the head was buried. So at this time, bronze would have cost a fortune. So instead of just stealing this, and your immediate response is probably like, well, they stole whatever's in the eyes and got rid of the head. But really, the bronze itself was probably worth more than whatever is in the eyes. So that somebody buried it was probably something similar to what we've looked at in prehistoric art. Does like equal like? Did somebody think of this as like sympathetic magic? Um, these Akkadians and Sargon, they weren't nice people, and they ruled really like in a brutal, brutal way. So, did somebody bury his head hoping to do him harm? Possibly. And here's the grandson Naram Sin. This is a stele. A stele is a long block of stone. We're going to see this again in a few places, so we're going to remember what a stele is. This is a relief carving using the shape of the block that it's on to create this mountain form. And I hope you can immediately think of other things that use the shape, sort of like the bison on the antler, where it's like stuck into the shape. It turns its head so it can fit in there, or the lion-headed man, using the shape of the object it's on to create the thing. So this is the victory stela of Naram Sin. You see here the stars. There would have been another one that's damaged. So the stars are shining down on him. He is hierarchical scale. You can see he's much bigger than everybody else. He literally stands on the mountain, but seems to be standing on them. But what the artist has done is they're not just piled up. He's created a landscape of levels so that the people seem to make sense the way that they're piled up there. Right? And you say here, there's somebody begging for their life here, maybe even taking their own life, so they can be spared. I don't want to say that word from Naram Sin taking his life. And you see Naram Sin wears the head with horns, the hat with horns, which indicates God. So he does consider himself to be God on earth, literally defeating his enemies larger than life. We're going to notice too that he has his torso facing us and his legs are sideways. He is in twisted perspective. This is human twisted perspective. We saw the bulls, right? Ironically, he has these horns like a bull. So that would make a good comparison as well to, say, something on a cave painting. So there's all the information for that. So I should point out that this is one of the first instances we see that, we see temples that are really tall for their time that seem to be literally like lording it over the landscape in a way, using height to show power, right? It's a religious structure, but it is imposing on people to have this structure on the land. It does show power of the ruler who built the temple. And now we're seeing these images show power through art, manipulating the artwork to show a ruler as powerful. The Neo-Sumerian age is so the Akkadians don't last that long. People obviously hate them and want to fight them and get rid of them. So a warring mountain people come down and they defeat the Akkadians, who eventually are defeated by the Sumerians again. So we have this New Sumerian age. And instead of separate city-states, they see that it is probably safer and better rule to have a single state, so one God, but the status of government is elevated again. They're no longer just servants to the king. And in this time period, there are large building projects, so they're prosperous. And this giant structure, the ziggurat of Ur, is built during this time. So this is in modern-day Iraq. And you can see how very gigantic this is on the flat desert lands. All right, so a ziggurat usually is referred to because of all these different levels, right? It's like a pyramid. It's like the proto to a pyramid. So it's dedicated to Nana, which is the moon god or chief deity. God would live on the most high elevated plane, then the priests, then officials, and elevated above everyone else. So we literally have the social stratifications personified in architecture. We have all these ramps here. I think your book indicates there is 100 steps on each, which is an important little note because we will see cultures in the future who are obsessed with numbers in their architecture. So we have these ramps that make it easier to bring up carts and things for offerings. Like bring up animals and things like that. All right, so a ziggurat, this giant structure on the land in Ur. Gudea is an odd thing in the chapter because he is not a god or a king. He is a civil servant. He seems to be more like a priest, but he was not. He was a man who sort of was just a government official, really. Here he is shown, his head is missing now, holding the plan in his lap for the ziggurat. So he must have been involved with that somehow. This is made of diorite, which is a very hard stone, and your book has a quote from Gudea bragging that he has a sculpture made of diorite, but he doesn't have just one. He has a few. And he's shown here with his hands being folded, and he looks to be in great physical shape, right? But if he had his head, you would think he'd be a little out of proportion. And your book has this in it. This is also Gudea, also diorite. And you see the writing on him, the cuneiform. He's shown in his sheepskin hat. He seems to be youngish and athletic. The proportions, he was not a tall man, it is written, but he does seem to be a little out of proportion. His legs seem very small, or maybe his chest seems very big, his arms do anyway. He does have enlarged eyes and stares off into space, a little bit like the votive figures of Sumer. This, again, is Neo-Sumer. And the odd thing about this is he is holding a water jar with water overflowing on both sides. And this is something that is really only reserved for maybe a king who thinks he is God, or for the gods themselves, because it symbolizes as life-giving, like the center of life, where life comes out of. So this is very odd for a civil servant to have this as something he is doing in a sculpture. All right, over to Babylon. Of course, these warring communities, and when we say it didn't last long, it's centuries long. There's a lot of upheaval in Mesopotamia. Babylon is a city-state that does grow in power, and they create some outlandish work, if you want to call it that. This is a votive plaque dedicated to the goddess Anana, who is the goddess of war, love, and fertility. It's similar to the goddess Ishtar. And we'll look at the Ishtar gates in a minute. She has wings, bird feet, and holds knots, which represent authority. She has a tiara made of bull's horns. You can see them all stacked up there. She stands on lions with those crazy feat of hers. And this was one of many of these types of things. These are votive offerings that you could buy and bring to the temple or wherever you're going for your rituals. Um, so these were sort of what we might consider mass produced. All right, so we have a lot going on here, right? We have the use of lions or nature or anthropomorphic figures. Her pose is of power, but we can talk about the proportions of the female figure, and I hope you can see where I'm going. This makes a great comparison. You know, this woman, the one on the right, looks almost like a Venus figure, and this has been called a Venus figure. You know, using proportion to show what's sort of important to a culture, even though the Babylonian work is using a lot more um, uh, iconography or symbolism to help us understand what's going on. Probably the more famous thing that happened in Babylon is we have there are rules in all these other societies we've looked at, but this is an instance of all the laws are written down as if it is a constitution almost. So here we have the stele, again, the long piece of stone, with the laws of Hammurabi written on the whole thing. And this wasn't the only one. These were put around. This is just the most elaborate one with the sculpture on top. These were put around so that people could use them as something to go to and read and say, hey, that was illegal what just happened. And then they have proof, like, you're not supposed to do that. This is what's supposed to happen. And so it wasn't just the rules of law, like what you should do. It was also the punishment if you do it. You've probably heard the expression eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If you haven't, it's a thing. It comes from this. All right. So Hammurabi, um, it wasn't the most humane. We think laws, like, oh, we're going to, and the Constitution, like everybody's rights are protected. But the laws are very skewed towards certain classes. If you killed a slave, you could practically get away with it. If you killed somebody else's slave, you'd have to owe them something. But if you killed, somebody up on the scales, then you would be put to death. Um, you know, crimes against women were less severe than crimes against men of status. So your book says something like, let's see, if he kills a man's slave, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina. If someone steals property from a temple, he will be put to death, as will the person who receives the stolen goods. Don't come to my house if you steal something. If a man is guilty of incest with his daughter, he shall be exiled. If a man strikes a freeborn woman so that she loses her unborn child, he shall pay 10 shekels for her loss. If the woman dies, his daughter shall be put to death. All right, so the women are going to get in trouble no matter what. All right, so it's maybe not humane laws, but if you can think about the consequences are so severe, what that would have meant for people and law. It's probably a very good deterrent to know that, if you do certain things, you're going to lose a lot more than just a couple years in prison or something. You're going to be put to death. If you steal something, they'll cut off your hand. That's one of the laws, right? So it's some of it seems very one-to-one, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but some of it is like, okay, we'll kill your wife if you do this. So, it's maybe not the most humane system. All right, but the top of the stele shows Hammurabi himself with a god, probably Shamash, which in my opinion is the best name for a god. So Shamash sits on a throne with his feet on water, like he was standing on water. We'll see that again. He has the horns stacked up of a god. He has a Lightning is up here. Oh, here it is, off his shoulders. He is much bigger. Like if he stands up, he'll be much, much bigger than Hammurabi. And he is handing over the rod and cord um, of a god to Hammurabi. And the rod is the standard of measurement in ancient times, and it's always goes by the king's forearm, whoever the king is. So the standard would change when the king changed. Hammurabi shows respect in his pose, as if he's like um, he's sort of making a gesture like he's speaking the word of God with his hand like up to his mouth, um, and almost like a bow, but he does lock eyes with the god. So there is some kind of um, equivalency here, right? So God hands Hammurabi the laws of the land, also a familiar story. And so anybody who had a problem with Hammurabi's law, well, then you have a problem with Shamash. And we've seen this just recently. And I'm showing these comparisons so you kind of get it in your head to start making connections, because on an exam, and I've asked you to make a comparison this week in writing, is to get you to start thinking, across the chapters, because that's sort of how the course runs. People in power using the gods to justify their power. God told me to do it, so I am the king. Over to Turkey. We're still in Babylon. Oops, hold on. One second. All right, we have the Lion Gate. So we do have some. Turkey does have access to stone, so not just mud brick. And we're looking at the civilization of the Hittites, who are great builders and have great resources. All right, and this is all that kind of remains. These were gigantic stone figures. All right, so the Assyrians in northern, we just have a couple things we're going to look at in northern Mesopotamia. This is the citadel of Sargon, and you don't really need to know this. I've kind of eliminated some of the things from your chapter just because we have so many images. But what we do want to look at is the guardian of the palace, and that is the Lamassu. The Lamassu is a man-headed winged bull. The head is usually that of a king, and you can see he has the beard of a king. 13 feet, almost 14 feet high. So these are gigantic, right? These would have been like twice as big as a human if they walked up to it. Right? And of course, now they're in museums. So these giant winged sculptures, and I hope anthropomorphic jumps into your head right away. We're going to see this again and again, like humans and animals mixed together for a show of power, usually, or some kind of mythology in the future. So the Lamassu has some odd things about it. And now, if you're in a seated class, I'd ask you, what do you see that's so odd about this, other than like all the composite things happening with humans and animals? And hopefully you would say, oh, well, it seems to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 legs. A Lamassu does not have 5 legs. What's happening here is if you look front ways at the Lamassu, it will have 2 legs. We are looking at it 3/4 here, but if you looked at it sideways, so if you're looking this way, it has 2 legs. If you're looking this way, it would only have 4 legs. So we only see 5 legs because of our angle right now. All right, so these are we're stuck on the actual palace. All right, so we might even consider them to be reliefs, right? Because they are meant to be looked at just from 2 different angles, right? The other angle would have been against the wall, all right? But they are guardians to the palace, and usually it's the head of a king. So we've seen this before in prehistoric art, right? With the bull. You can't show a bull with just 2 horns. He has to turn his head so that you can see, or a bull with 1 horn. He has to turn his head so you can see 2 horns, because that makes sense. right? It takes away from the power or strength of the thing being shown if they have less than, right? We'll see that again. And this is why leaders, let's look back at this guy, are shown with two arms, even though, this is very awkward. He should be sideways, or this. We have his legs are facing this way, Naramsin, but his body is twisted so we can see two arms. Right? So this twisted perspective is so that you don't show something of strength or someone of strength with less than what they're supposed to have. Odd. Right. Ashurbanipal. There's also an Ashurnasirpal to confuse everything. Hunting lions is the relief sculpture we look at in the book. This is at a palace. And again, using lions as some kind of power, but instead of taking the power or using the power to show strength, this relief actually shows power over the lion. So it was the king's duty to go out and hunt lions. Just like in Egypt, we'll see it was the duty to go out and hunt hippopotamuses or hippopotami. So here we see the king is, his attendants here are stabbing them and he's shooting forward. And these lions are shown in all different states of dying. I love this. It's like a study on somebody did actually study the way lions die most likely. This one's losing his lunch before he dies. All right, so you can see like that's pretty naturalistic, and we see all the muscle tone. I mean, somebody went to great length. They probably had dead lions that they were studying for this, right? To show all the muscle tone and the details in the fingers, or the paws, I should say. So very naturalistic. So man's power or a king's power over nature. And we'll see this again. So the Assyrians get conquered by the Neo-Babylonians. I know these are a lot of cultures. We'll probably just, I'll on the test review, I will limit them. We'll probably lump them together into, bigger areas. You don't need to remember every single little place. So the city of Babylon is built up once the Babylons come to power again over the Assyrians. And they build the Ishtar gate, which is the entrance to a giant structure or a compound, really, of many, many buildings. So some of these parts remain, but some of them are moved into safe locations. Like if you want to see the Ishtar gates, you can go to Berlin, Germany, and it's in a museum there right around the corner from um, a Greek temple, as a matter of fact, in the same museum. So we have the Ishtar gates here, these beautiful blue azure tiles with all of these animals, which were built on top of the tiles, so they're relief sculptures. And you can see how incredibly decorative this is, how sumptuous this would have been for visitors. And this is just a little part of it. The compound goes on and on with these blue walls. But this is just to show these animals, how they're built on top, and then the modeling and 3D elements of all of the animals. Okay, so we have at least nature is becoming more and more naturalistic, and human proportions are too, with the exception of maybe Gudea. All right, and then Persia, we're not going to remember all of these things specifically, but I do want to just show you that, not that they're not important, but for our course, what the important things are for us to remember is that when we get to later chapters, we're going to look at things like columns and capitals and post and lintel, which I pointed out in the last chapter, that we don't want to give them credit to other cultures who really didn't invent them. They just perfected them in some way. These things were out there, and a lot of these things were in Persia, which some Greeks and Romans would have seen. So we have columns and decorative capitals here, with some with animals, some with plant things on them. This here is a acanthus. We'll certainly see that in Greek art. We have these fluted columns. All right, so this is sort of like the precursor to, not even, some of it is very um, uh, contemporary with Greeks. Right, so we have this column capital with bulls, right, that would have held up a giant other lintel. So the columns would be posts in a post and lintel construction. So we don't have to remember this specifically. We will just remember that these things are out there that other cultures we're going to study would have seen. All right. So that's it for this chapter 2. I will get to chapter 3 soon. As always, email me if you have any questions.